Hello, today I'd like to talk about Canada. Now you can see we have a map of Canada right here. Canada is on the map just north of the United States. And let me get my pen ready here. I'll put it on blue. So as I'm sure you probably know already, the United States is here. And we live way down below the screen in Georgia. And here's Canada, much farther north than us. The people of Canada have descendants from many different countries, uh, similar to the United States, but in Canada you have a lot of people who have descendants from Britain. In fact, the book will tell you that 40% of Canadian citizens now have descendants from Britain, and probably the second largest would be from France. We have, I think the book says, 27% of Canadian and have descendants from France. Now, interestingly enough, only 5% come from the First Nations. Now, the First Nations is kind of like our American Indians. First Nations are Native Americans who settled long ago. They're the descendants of those that came to Canada over the Bering Strait land bridge. Now, here's what historians and scientists think. Uh, just to this side of Canada is going to be Alaska. That's a bad drawing, but there it is. But anyway, Alaska has just a small, narrow bit of ocean just off the end of it between it and Russia. Big country Russia over here. And scientists think, Russia and Alaska, scientists think at one point the sea level was low enough to where you actually could cross coming from Russia from present day Russia to Alaska. So scientists are kind of the opinion that whenever the level of the ocean happened to be low, that many people just happened to end up who started on this side, this piece of land, ended up on this piece of land. And the theory is that that's where many of these Native Americans in our country and in Canada came from. Some of the more widely known tribes of the First Nations are the Inuit, Mi'kmaq, and the Cree. But anyway, scientists believe that the people of the First Nations crossed over the Bering Strait thousands of years ago. But it's only about 400 years ago that European colonies started coming to Canada. And a very similar thing, as you probably know, the United States. About 400 years ago, we had people from Europe who made these colonies in the New World, as I guess it was referred to. Uh, no surprise that the two countries that made the biggest colonization effort in Canada were Britain and France. And eventually, to make a long story short, Britain and France are two countries with a history of conflict. Uh, Many years they have not gotten along. So there actually was a war in 1763. Pardon me. There actually was a war in 1763 between France and Britain. Now, it wasn't completely fought over Canada, but one of the results is that France lost and they had to surrender most of its territory in Canada. Now, here's kind of the problem there. If you have these people who are living, and what it'll be in this vicinity here. If you have these people who are living here from France, and the war is lost and this territory becomes British territory, it's a long way back to France across the Atlantic Ocean. And if these settlers were living here already, they just stayed there. So as a result, you still have a very large French population in these areas here. And in fact, you can see the province here, Quebec, is a French name, and a lot of Quebec is people of French descent. Eventually, it was in 1877. Oh, I'm sorry, 1867, when Canada finally did become a an independent nation. However, even as an independent nation, it had kind of Upper Canada and Lower Canada. Upper Canada was primarily settled by those of British descent. And you can imagine that Lower Canada, sorry about the pen problems here, that Lower Canada was primarily a people of French descent. So in 1877, they became a self-governing nation. 1867, I should say. And since they had a history of different groups in Canada, they kind of have adapted a policy of multiculturalism. Multiculturalism is an acceptance of many cultures instead of just one. And it's kind of been a part of Canada's history. Not as much as part of United States history, but it's been a part of Canada's history. Canadian citizens, like the United States, have many of the same rights. They have freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom of the assembly, just like we have in the United States. Now, this country is an incredibly large country. In fact, it is the second largest as far as land mass in the world. The largest land area for a country is actually Russia over here. Has the largest, and Canada has the second largest. Largest as far as land mass, larger than the United States is. However, its population is very small. Its population, according to the book, at the time this book was printed, was about 31 million, which is not much compared to like the United States. 3/4 of the population of Canada lives in southern Canada. The southern area here, primarily off on the eastern side, but the southern area of Canada has most of the population. 3/4 of the population live in the southern areas of Canada. And you know, if you think about it, you can probably figure out why. It's cold up through here. I mean, you're just not going to have many settlers who originally settled up in these northern areas. It's not terribly far from the North Pole, from this upper part of Canada right here. It's just incredibly cold. So when people started settling years and years ago, they kind of tended to settle in more of the lower areas. And there's another reason why people settle over here. We have the Great Lakes. We have a Great Lake that's over here, a Great Lake that's over here. This is the state of Michigan right here, by the way. We have Great Lakes over here, we have Great Lake over here, and it all runs into this river that goes out to the sea. This river that goes out to the sea is called the St. Lawrence River. I don't think I'll have enough room to put the whole term there, so I'll just say St. L. The St. Lawrence River goes into these Great Lakes. So if you are establishing some kind of company, some kind of industry, if it's anywhere around these Great Lakes or anywhere around the St. Lawrence River, you have a way that you can get your goods out into the world. So you're not going to find too much expansion into northern Canada here. Northern Canada is mainly going to remain rugged and cold, and there's just not a lot of people that live in northern Canada. All the favorable geography and economic opportunity is going to be down here in southern Canada. Now we do want to talk about a couple of Canadian cities. One of them is Vancouver. Vancouver is over here in this vicinity here. Vancouver is the West Coast's largest port. I think your book is going to call it the gateway to the Pacific, and you can see it's right here on the Pacific Ocean. And there's a lot of trade that they can have with places like Russia or places like down south in Australia. It's just a very favorable place to be able to trade with other areas. And as a result, since it is so close to the other lands here, you have many refugees. These are people who flee a country because of war or disaster or persecution. You have a large refugee population in Vancouver. Now, another similar thing is going to happen over here in Toronto. Toronto is located on Lake Ontario, about right here. And I will say Toronto, and I don't think I can get it all in. But Toronto is located over here. It is also known for having many, many immigrants. In fact, your book is going to say that a fourth of the immigrants in all of Canada happen to live there in Toronto. And Toronto's population, 40% of that population was born outside of the country of Canada. Its location is kind of like Vancouver. It has easy access to other places. Toronto, if you were to have, you have easy access to the United States areas that are bordering all these Great Lakes. It has easy access to the outside world, and just as a result, it is not only a place where many refugees come, it is a big trading center. Now, we've talked about some of these places, Toronto and Vancouver, and all the terms that we have up here. Let's see what you remember. Can you remember about what percentage of people in Canada have descendants from Britain? What about the percentage of people coming from France? What about the percentage of people from the First Nations? Do you remember any of the Indian tribes of the First Nations? Can you recall when Britain and France had a war and what the result of that war was, and why many people from France still stayed in Canada? And do you remember what the Bering Strait had to do with all of this? Bering Strait, people came over it thousands of years ago, historians think. But how long ago was it when Europeans came over to United States and made colonies in the United States and Canada? What group primarily was in Upper Canada? What group primarily was in Lower Canada? You remember what year Canada became a self-governing nation? And what is multiculturalism? Canada supports multiculturalism. Population of Canada was about 31 million. Is that large or small for a big nation? Where would you find 3/4 of Canada's population? Why would you find 3/4 of Canada's population there? Can you locate Vancouver on a map? Can you tell me why Vancouver has so many refugees and is a big trading city? Can you tell me where Toronto is on a map? What it's close to? Why it's a very important trading city and why it has so many refugees also? Well, I hope you've learned a little bit about Canada.